The scripture today is from Mark chapter 4, verses 35 to 41. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
I find it interesting that the lectionary committee, the ones that put the scriptures together that I often use each week in tandem with one another, that they chose today's passages where Jesus calms the storm alongside the Old Testament story for today, which I will be telling during my sermon. The times were very bleak, and the storm was rolling across the land of Israel in the time of a young boy who mainly was a shepherd for his large family, a shepherd of the family's sheep. When King Saul was on the throne, their successes had been many in battle until now. The hand of the Philistines was heavy upon Israel. The Philistines had become an overwhelming, oppressive, intrusive presence in the land. They threatened to take away everything the people had held dear. They threatened life itself. It seemed that death followed in the wake of this storm of armies as they ravaged the land. And just as King Saul had led many a battle and his armies were posed to drive out the Philistines from the land, there appears another obstacle on the Philistine side. It's Goliath. It's a giant of a man standing in their way. Faced with the Philistines and their giant, Saul and his people were feeling very oppressed. Just as happens to us when there are storms passing through our lives, when giant obstacles seem to be in our way. The insurmountable, unsurpassable, uncooperative giants of oppression and disagreement, of competition, of rejection. It's then that our oppression turns to depression and sometimes to despondency. So it was with Saul and his people. And as always happens to us, Saul and the people didn't know what to do. So they did nothing. They were totally immobilized by even the thought of this huge person and his four brothers, by the way. Immobilized. Day after day, they sat in their tents and they sulked. as Goliath came out and issued his challenge to them. Day after day, Saul and his people sat in their tents, immobilized by their own fears and their anxieties, immobilized by the very sight of this one man standing in their way. So did you notice that I said they were immobilized by their fear of Goliath? Not by anything that the giant had done to them. Not one single soldier of the people of Israel had been defeated in battle by Goliath. Not yet, anyway. They were not depressed because of what the giant had done to them. They were depressed just because he was there and he frightened them. Like so many obstacles which confront us, which keep us from doing the things that we dream of doing, which tell us it can't be done. Before we even try, Goliath goes unchallenged. Like so many of the giants which confront us, Goliath didn't win by strength of sword and spear, but by anxiety and fear. What was their biggest fear? It was that the giant would defeat them. And how did they know that he could defeat them? Because Goliath had told them so. Goliath had told them so. What insurmountable task looms before you? What insurmountable task taunts you? What bigger-than-life challenge to your integrity and your faith is hanging over you today, not letting you see beyond the moment? What is the huge storm of the thing that brings you the most fear and most anxiety? What looming loudmouth challenges your faith in God? What storm in life has come between you and your faith in God? Perhaps the root of our problem and our depression is like that of the Israelites, that we listen too very much to those giants, to the loudmouth of the blowing storm coming toward us, and allow them to taunt and threaten our integrity. And we listen not enough to the voice of God. Perhaps the root of the problem is that we become overwhelmed by the storms of our lives before we have even entered into the challenge of meeting them. But worse yet, we ourselves do some of the work for these storms and giants for them. Goliath's boasting was bad enough, but it was nothing compared to the way that Saul's men let their fears grow within them in the dark hours of the night, in the anxious moments of fearful soldiers. Goliath grew taller and taller and bigger until this very huge man turned into a giant indeed. When we're afraid, when we are our own, that's when we are our own worst enemies. When we're depressed, we often don't talk about our fears to anyone. And the more that we talk to only ourselves, the more those fears grow and grow and grow until they're giant-sized. Faced with Goliath, Saul sulked silently in his tent. He wasn't out leading the men into battle against this giant. When David finally came on the scene, David, the little boy, David talked. He talked. and he talked, and he talked. If you read the passage, which was so long I didn't have it read this morning, he talked so much his brother Eliab finally told him to keep quiet. But David kept talking anyway. By the time he talked with Saul, David had talked that giant down to a manageable size. To a size that David thought he, this little boy, could manage. Let no one's heart fall because of this giant. Your servant will go out and fight him, David said. Saul at first said, no way. You can't do it. You're just a kid. Are you kidding me? The disciples cried to Jesus, Master, we're going to drown. And the problem was much bigger than the waves crashing against the boat or the howling wind. It was that they had lost faith in God. But Jesus just said, peace. Be still. And I wonder, was he talking to the elements of the storm or to the hearts and minds of his frightened and immobilized friends? Peace. Be still. David kept talking Saul's fears down. And after a while, some little spark of something Saul hardly recognized anymore, started to grow inside of him. It had been so long since he'd felt any of it in himself, Saul didn't quite recognize that spark for what it was. Just a little bit of hope growing inside of him. The pep talk that David gave seemed to help, though. Just like talking helps us when we're depressed and we're immobilized. Naming our fears and our anxieties helps to get our fears sorted out and to get in touch with reality again. There's no greater gift anyone can receive than to have a friend who will listen. When we're depressed and a friend will talk to us, a friend who will talk and say, well, and help us sort out just how big those giants are or are not. So David talked and Saul began to hope. Saul still didn't quite believe it, but there was something about this boy. Remember, he'd been anointed a couple of Sundays ago. And then David reminded Saul of something very important. Something Saul and all of Israel had apparently forgotten for the time. That God also has a part in our battles with giants. David, the shepherd boy, said, the Lord who saved me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will save me from the hand of this Philistine. So if talking is our first line of defense, remembering is just as important. Because what we must be remembering is that we are not alone. The God who has saved us in the past, who has helped us through our challenges, will be with us. We don't face these obstacles alone, and we never have. So remember the times God has been with us in the past. Through troubles which seemed like giants then. And we survived. We're more than survived. There's always been someone who's helped me through the wildest storms of my life. And I'm sure that must be true for most of you as well. If you think back and realize that God has sent someone, or you read something that helped you, and God was present with you. Well, anyway, perhaps from remembering some of the times when the Lord had been with him, Saul decided to let David give it a try. And then Saul gives David the armor, his own armor. Everyone knows that the way you defeat giants is to put on the most protection that you can, right? And pick up the biggest sword that you can find, right? But it was ridiculous, even ludicrous. There's little David, a little person. Saul's huge armor draped all over him, going in every which way, and he could barely move in it, and the helmet that kept sliding over his eyes so he couldn't see. Remember, he's a boy, and Saul is a large man. David says, "No, I'm sure you mean well, and I'm grateful, but I can't wear this. I'll just take my staff and my sling and these 5 smooth stones and go fight that giant. If his size is laughable, then the methods that he chose were all the more laughable. I'm sure there was someone standing by saying, we've never done it that way before." And they were right. It hadn't been done before, but it was about to be. With a brave young boy, no armor, and a little slingshot shot. New challenges require new resources and new tools to do a new kind of job. To wear Saul's armor would have meant fighting Goliath on Goliath's terms. And David would surely have died on Goliath's terms. To face up to our giants, we have to think of new ways. Most of the giant obstacles which life puts in our way are not illusions. Yes, they are very real to us and very threatening. But most of them will fall faster and easier than they would have us believe. We just need to figure out some new ways of getting at or around them. David found one spot that wasn't covered with armor, and that's where his stone went. We need to figure out new ways of getting around the obstacles, which of course takes exactly the kind of creative thinking that much prayer and much meditation can bring to us. And David was a prayer. He wrote all those songs, they're prayers. So, we talk, and we remember the ways which God has been faithful in the past, and we find new ways of thinking around it. Hopeful, faithful, trust-filled ways of thinking. And the rest of the story is almost anticlimactic. You know, the real battle has already taken place back in the tents. The one which decided who would win or lose was decided before David ever stepped foot out on the field of battle. Our greatest battles are in our own minds and hearts, usually, with our fears and our anxieties and our depressions. When we talked and remembered and hoped and knew that we were not alone. And when we trusted in God, who has saved us before and who will save us again. And when we found new strategies, when we used the skills that God has given to us. By the time you step out on the field to face whatever your giant is, you've already defeated it. By the time that David said, "I come in the name of the Lord of hosts," the battle was over. And Jesus said, "Peace, be still." And their souls were calmed. And their heads stopped spinning around. And all hands on deck took to their tasks in that storm. And maybe the storm wasn't as big and devastating as they thought it had been. Or maybe it was. But they found hope anyway. Whatever obstacles you face as a congregation in the coming months, remember to talk it through. Remember that God has been with you in the past and will continue to be with you in the future. And people will come back. And the church will live. God has been with us even through this pandemic. God is with you in your boat, and God will guide you. God will help you. God will calm you. God will invigorate you to try new things and help you find the way. And with God in your boat, it's never as bad as it may seem. So God be with you in this boat. Amen.